Welcome to the weekly update of Israel and Christians today. It's Friday, the 11th of July, 2025. We're going to talk about smokes and mirrors in the Middle East. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has left Washington following his third visit to the White House since President Trump entered his second term as president. Netanyahu and Trump have kept very, very close contact throughout this term of the presidency. There was a lot of speculation about this visit, and despite the many speculations, the visit has not resulted, at least not publicly, in major breakthroughs or announcements in respect of the many issues that were canvassed in the meetings between the two leaders and their teams, such as the future of the Gaza conflict with Hamas, a new Abraham Accords which were touted with Saudi Arabia or Syria, the conflict with Iran, all of these very interrelated issues. But, as we all know, the Middle East is all about smokes and mirrors. All is not what it seems. As former Israeli ambassador to the US, Michael Oren, observes, it is quite possible, indeed likely, that behind the scenes in their private meetings, Netanyahu and Trump have discussed and reached agreement on many, if not all of these issues, without making those agreements public. An alternative reading, as Israeli historian Benny Morris has argued, is that the lack of public announcements could point to significant differences of views as between the Israeli and US leaders. We think that's unlikely given Trump's transparency in most issues. He's likely to have made that clear. There were no signs of significant differences. In any event, no announcements have been made concerning the Gaza war or suggesting progression in Trump's ambitions to have Syria, Saudi Arabia, and other Muslim-majority states to sign Abraham Accords with Israel, nor were there any major announcements concerning the ongoing war with Iran. Okay, so turning to developments in Gaza, it had been expected that an agreement would be announced concerning the future of the war with Hamas, including possibly the announcement of a ceasefire and release of the remaining hostages. Hamas continues to hold around 50 hostages in tunnels in the Gaza Strip, of which probably only about 20 are still alive. Instead, Netanyahu and Trump only stated that they hoped that a ceasefire would be negotiated with Hamas in the coming days. Israel has consistently stated that one of its war aims is to eliminate Hamas. Netanyahu has said this very clearly over recent days and weeks. However, Hamas has control in Gaza at three levels. First, as a military army. Secondly, as a guerrilla organization. And thirdly, as a bunch of thugs using brute force to keep control of the Gaza civilian population. We've seen many signs of brute force executions and other acts of violence by Hamas against its own people of Gaza. Now, Israel's army has achieved success in destroying Hamas at the first level as a military army, but not at the second and third levels. Destroying Hamas's capabilities to fight guerrilla warfare is almost impossible to achieve. As recent days have shown, there have been ambushes on IDF soldiers in the north of Gaza which show that Hamas is still able to carry out effective guerrilla operations. Not all of the tunnels have been destroyed. Hamas operatives are still hiding both in the north and middle and south of the Gaza Strip. And it is, of course, impossible to entirely remove Hamas's violent control of the Palestinian population through brute force, all of which means that the IDF campaign in Gaza is suffering from the law of diminishing returns. More soldiers are being killed for less returns. And there is, as a result, growing pressure on Netanyahu, both international and domestic, to cut his losses and reach a deal with Hamas that may not see either its total destruction or the return of all the hostages. The situation in the meantime on the ground in Gaza remains dire as the IDF continues to destroy infrastructure, houses, buildings, and so forth, which is necessary, tragically, in order to eliminate Hamas's tunnels and military installations. The people of Gaza are increasingly destitute. Humanitarian aid is now being coordinated by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF, a joint US-Israeli aid effort formed in February to replace the UN's Relief and Works Agency for Palestine, UNRWA, which of course was totally infiltrated by Hamas operatives and has lost all credibility. And of course, Hamas has been looting and stockpiling aid. This has been the main problem of how to get aid to the people of Gaza while avoiding Hamas misuse and manipulation of the aid. GHF announced on Wednesday the successful completion of a pilot program aimed at delivering food aid directly to Gaza civilians, bypassing the Hamas terror group. Conducted in partnership with Al-Amal, a local non-governmental organization, the pilot program distributed more than 2,000 boxes of food to residents in central Gaza. GHF said it plans to expand the program across several communities by collaborating with additional local NGOs. The long-term goal, it said, is to deliver over 20,000 food boxes, equivalent to 1.2 million meals daily across all regions of Gaza. Under the program, food distribution begins when a community leader contacts GHF directly or through a partner. GHF then vets the leader, assesses the community's needs, and coordinates the delivery of an initial shipment of food aid. The community leader collects the boxes at a predetermined location and distributes them to known members of their community. To ensure accountability, GHF verifies that all aid reaches those in need by cross-checking deliveries against a list of recipients provided by the community leader. So that's more or less the situation in the Gaza Strip. Turning to the region, the Iran-backed Houthis, who control large swathes of Yemen but are not the country's internationally recognized government, continue to threaten Israel and disrupt international trade. The Houthis reached a ceasefire agreement with the US in May and then stopped their attacks on commercial ships for some 2 months. This week, however, they attacked and sank 2 vessels, killing at least 4 people. Houthis remain a scourge on the international trade. So let's turn to the United Nations. The UN Human Rights Council, based in Geneva, is plagued by a spirit of anti-Semitism. The council, which replaced the Human Rights Commission a number of years ago, is just as bad as its predecessor. Several years ago, it established a permanent commission of inquiry to investigate Israeli crimes and breaches of international law in the so-called occupied Palestinian territory. It only investigates Israeli crimes and not Hamas or Palestinian crimes. It also has a special rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories. This is Francesca Albanese. Albanese, of Italian origin, holds the view that the Jewish state of Israel is by definition a genocidal state built on the objective of eliminating the Palestinian people through a strategy of replacement and ethnic cleansing. Her virulent anti-Semitism has earned her the censure of many states who refuse to acknowledge her work and have indeed called for her removal. The United Nations so far refuses to acknowledge these calls or to remove her. The organization UN Watch has undertaken a campaign over recent months to highlight her anti-Semitism and call for her removal. Now, last week, Albanese published her latest report. It's the most extreme of all her reports, and she states that she has investigated the corporate machinery sustaining Israel's settler colonial project of displacement and replacement of the Palestinians in the occupied territory. She says that while political leaders and governments shirk their obligations, far too many corporate entities have profited from Israel's economy of illegal occupation, apartheid, and now genocide. The complicity exposed by this report is just the tip of the iceberg, she says. Ending it will not happen without holding the private sector accountable. And she goes on and on about international law. Of course, it's outrageous that she accuses Israel of genocide when even the International Court of Justice has not confirmed that genocide is being conducted. And this case before the court is continuing. Albanese has her own definition of genocide and she thinks she's entitled to apply it. Now, in response, U.S. Secretary of State Rubio announced yesterday that the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Albanese. He stated, Albanese has directly engaged with the International Criminal Court in efforts to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute nationals of the USA or Israel without the consent of those countries. Neither the US nor Israel is party to the court's Rome Statute, making this action a gross infringement on the sovereignty of both countries. US, he said, has repeatedly condemned and objected to the biased and malicious activities of Albanese that have long made her unfit for service as a special rapporteur. Albanese has spewed unabashed anti-Semitism, expressed support for terrorism, and open contempt for the United States, Israel, and the West. That bias, according to Rubio, has been apparent across the span of her career. She has recently escalated this effort by writing threatening letters to dozens of entities worldwide, including major American companies, and recommending the ICC pursue investigations and prosecutions of these companies and their executives. We will not tolerate these campaigns of political and economic warfare which threaten our national interests and sovereignty, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio yesterday. So, to draw all of this to a close, let us pray this week for the hostages still held in the Gaza Strip. May they be protected and given miraculous strength to survive this horrendous ordeal. Let us pray for Israel's enemies, that their hearts may be turned. Pray for Hamas and all those connected with Hamas. Pray ultimately for the peace of Jerusalem, and that all will look for the coming of the Prince of Peace, who alone can bring reconciliation and peace to this troubled region, and especially the conflict concerning Jerusalem. Thank you for listening. That's the end of this weekly update. We wish you a blessed weekend and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye-bye.